Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Every algorithm L that qualifies the if, right? If there's an algorithm L that always gives us sub-polynomial regret, then this, okay? In fact, you can take this log t to the right-hand side. If you do that, what it means is, as t goes to infinity, the regret that the algorithm incurs on this bandit instance is at least this constant times log t. Okay, so it is lower bounded by a problem-specific constant multiplying log t. Okay, so you can see why this is a non-trivial result. Okay, we needed both the if and the then. So in some sense, loosely, the if is telling us let's only look at good algorithms. Okay, not silly algorithms like the one that's always pulling ARM3. Right, good algorithms being one which will always give us sub-polynomial regret. If L is a good algorithm, then L has to incur at least logarithmic regret in the horizon. That's the statement of this theorem. Okay, and the precise dependence in the lower bound is made explicit, right? You have a problem-specific constant that is given as what accompanies the log t, okay, which is the dependence on the horizon. Okay, so you can take a look at the paper. The paper is fairly technically dense. What I have just distilled out and given to you is the sort of just the essence. Okay, the essence being, if you want to be good always, then you have to be at least so bad. Okay, and so bad being you have to get at least logarithmic regret in the horizon. Okay, so this is the classical result of Lai and Robbins. Okay, so let me again summarize. At the end of last class, we said what we would like is sublinear regret. In the first section today, we stated that if you satisfy these GLIE conditions, you can actually get sublinear regret. There's an if and only if, right? You have to do GL and IE if you want to get sublinear regret. And if you're getting sublinear regret, it means you are doing GL and IE. The second part, we asked, well, sublinear is good, but what is the lowest, right, among sublinear regret that you can get? And that is where we looked at Lai and Robbins' lower bound, saying if you actually want to go sub-polynomial all the time, right, then you need to be at least super logarithmic, okay, in the horizon. What's coming up next is some algorithms that actually achieve this logarithmic dependence on the horizon. Okay, they have upper bounds on their regret, which are logarithmic in the horizon. So this will be the UCB and KLUCB algorithms, followed by the Thompson sampling family of algorithms. That's what's coming up next. Let us get started with UCB. Okay, so this is a relatively simple algorithm to explain. In fact, it's just like 3-4 lines of pseudocode. This is due to Auer et al. Okay, this is a paper that's about 20 years old. Here's what we're doing. Okay, at each time step t, for each arm A, we are going to define a quantity called its upper confidence bound. Okay, upper confidence bound is why the algorithm is called UCB. So the UCB of arm A at time t is defined to be the sum of the empirical mean of arm A. Okay, this is P hat, okay, TA, that's what we will use to denote the empirical mean. Sum of that and a quantity here within square root, you have 2 times log of t, let's say natural log of t, divided by the number of pulls of arm A up to this time step. Okay, so UTA is the number of pulls of arm T up to this time step. So let me repeat, right? At time T, let's say the arm has been pulled UTA times and its empirical mean is P hat TA. Okay, so P hat TA is basically the ratio of the number of rewards that you got and UTA, right? Those two things are there, but we are going to combine them and create this upper confidence bound, which is the sum of P hat and square root of 2 divided by UTA log T. Okay, so one thing to mention is, this is going to be well defined only if UTA is at least 1, right? So sometimes before starting this algorithm, you'll just go and pull each arm once to make sure that things are well defined, the UCB is well defined. But the algorithm itself is very simple now that we have defined UCB. The algorithm is this: at any point of time, you pull that arm for which the UCB is maximum. Okay, so if you draw a picture of the bandit instance at any point of time, it's going to look like this, right? So let's say that this brown line for each arm is its empirical mean. To that, we are adding this constant, not this constant, this term square root of 2 divided by u log t. Right? So that's going to add something, and the bar on top, right, the black line, let's call that UCB. Find which arm has the highest UCB. So in this particular picture, it looks like this arm has the highest UCB. Go and pull it. Okay, so what's going to happen when you pull it? What's going to happen is you'll get one additional pull for that arm. So its U will go up by 1. Its empirical mean might change, right? You'll get 1 reward or 0 reward that will get added, and the denominator goes up by 1. So the empirical mean could change. And the UCB would therefore change for that arm. But even for the other arms, right, the UCB will change, okay, because the empirical mean won't change, the number of pulls won't change, but this T here, right, which is the total number of pulls up to this point, will go up by 1, okay. So the square root term is going to go up by just a little bit because it's square root of log T. And then at the next time step, right, again you see which arm has the highest UCB, pull it, keep doing this, okay, that's all you're doing. So really the crux of this algorithm is in this definition of UCB, right? Having defined it, it's just being greedy with respect to the UCB at every time step. Now you can see the intuition behind this algorithm, okay? So when an arm has been pulled very few times, right, when U is very small, so notice that the square root term is actually going to be large, right? And therefore you're going to have a UCB that is high. And therefore arms which have not been explored enough, there is some incentive to go and pull them because the UCB is going to turn out to be high. On the other hand, an arm that has been pulled lots of times, right, is going to have a high value of U. Therefore, the UCB is going to be very close to the empirical mean itself. Okay, so after a long horizon, like after a lot of sampling, you'll see that more or less, right, the UCB is very similar to the empirical mean. Right, so if you figured out, right, which arm is a good arm, an optimal arm, you'll be pulling that most of the time. But there is this term, right, that also will make sure that you're exploring infinitely often, in fact, in the limit, right? Because if an arm goes untouched for a long, long time, then very slowly, right, the log T will slowly increase and you will end up pulling that arm. Okay, so not only is UCB an algorithm that satisfies the GLIE conditions, it is shown, right, in that paper that UCB gives us a regret that is order log T. Okay, it has logarithmic dependence in the horizon, which we know from Lyon-Robins's lower bound is the best that we can do, right, in terms of dependence on the horizon. Well, it must be noted that UCB does not actually match the constant, right? Remember, we had a constant that came from the problem instance that was multiplying the log T, right? So UCB is not really optimal in that respect, but it was a very celebrated result because it gave this finite time upper bound on the regret, which was logarithmic in the horizon. Okay, but precisely the fact that it does not match the constant can get fixed, and that is fixed in what is called the KL-UCB algorithm. So KL-UCB is identical to UCB. Okay, of course it's not fully identical. There's a small difference, and that's what I'm explaining on this slide. So the only difference between UCB and KL-UCB is in the definition of the UCB itself. Okay, so on the UCB slide, the UCB was defined to be p hat plus square root of 2 divided by u log t, right? So we have a slightly more complicated definition over here. So for arm A at time t, we are going to define the UCB to be the maximum element in this set, okay, of numbers, let's say q between p hat and 1. So p hat is the empirical mean of the arm. So let's just consider the interval between p hat and 1, okay, and look at all the elements q inside of this interval that satisfy this inequality. Okay, this inequality being u times kl between p hat and q is less than or equal to log t plus c times log t, where c is some constant maybe you can take it to be 3. Okay. Whatever is that Q, right? Of all the Qs that maximize this, whichever Q is highest, that is defined to be the upper confidence bound at time t for arm A. So the other way of saying this is that UCB at time t for arm A, right, is in fact that Q between P hat and 1 that actually satisfies this inequality as an equality. Okay, it's not very hard to see that if you, for example, set take Q equal to P hat itself, right, then the KL divergence between P hat and P hat is 0. Okay, it's not, it will satisfy this inequality, but it will be like the smallest that you can do. If you set Q to be 1, okay, that's like the largest value that you can take, right? Then the KL divergence between P hat and 1, that's going to be infinity. Okay, so that's again going to be a quantity that does not satisfy this inequality. And in fact, KL of P hat Q is an increasing function, right, going from 0 to infinity. So there will be a particular point at which it exactly intersects with log t plus c log t divided by u. Okay, so there will be one point precisely in this interval that satisfies this up to equality, and that is going to be defined as the upper confidence bound for arm A at time t. Okay, so I mean, this is not very intuitive, but this comes out because of the mathematical definition that is used to analyze the algorithm. But even if you don't get to the bottom of this, the high level picture is we are just writing the formula for UCB differently. Okay, we are using the scale UCB KL formula rather than the UCB formula. So I just explained this to you. At Q equal to P hat itself, the KL divergence is 0. At Q equal to 1, it is infinity, and it is an increasing function. Therefore, there will be some unique Q in this interval that matches the inequality as an equality. You can find that Q by doing bisection, right? Like any sort of numerical method that can be used to find the place where exact equality happens. So it's not as easy to compute as just taking a square root or something like that, but it's not too hard either. Okay, just by binary search, for example, you can find out the UCB for the arm. The good news is this UCB, right, is actually what is called a tighter confidence bound for that particular arm's mean. Okay, so the idea behind UCB and KL UCB is when we are drawing this upper confidence bound, right, we are actually guaranteeing with high probability that the true mean of the arm will not exceed the UCB, okay, for a given mistake probability. And the KL UCB bound that we draw is probably going to be tighter than the UCB bound. The consequence of this is that the regret of KL UCB, right, is not only logarithmic in the horizon, but it also matches the problem specific constant given by Lai and Robbins. Okay, so in some sense, asymptotically, KL UCB is an optimal algorithm. Okay, you can't really do better than that other than like an additive constant or some sort of minor tweak, right? It basically in the limit matches Lai and Robbins' lower bound. Okay, so again, UCB and KL UCB are both algorithms that calculate an index for each algorithm. Okay, for each arm, which is a UCB or in this case a KL UCB. You're just being greedy with respect to this KL UCB or UCB, and lo and behold, right, these algorithms have the property that they give us regret that is logarithmic in the horizon, as well as KL UCB actually matching the lower bound of Lai and Robbins asymptotically. Okay, so what we are not doing in this week's lecture, but which is the subject of next week's lecture, is to formally prove, right, that UCB achieves this logarithmic regret. The central tool that we're going to use for that is something called a concentration inequality. Okay, so you know that if you take a random variable and sample it lots of times, we know sort of informally that the empirical mean will start getting closer and closer to the true mean, right? Precisely what is the rate at which that happens? How can we bound the deviation of the empirical mean from the true mean? So that is done using a concentration inequality, and it is because UCB and KL UCB depend on slightly different concentration inequalities that they have this difference in the bound that they achieve. Okay, so this is not the last you have seen of these algorithms. We will revisit them next week, where we will look at the key elements of their analysis. Okay, but if you're interested, yeah, please look at the reference. KLUCB is due to a 2011 paper, which is also linked from the course webpage. Okay, so now for yet another algorithm called Thompson sampling. Qualitatively, Thompson sampling is quite different from UCB. Okay, so before we actually introduce Thompson sampling, we need to introduce what is called the beta distribution. So this is something that Thompson sampling will use if it's working with Bernoulli rewards. Okay, so a beta distribution is a distribution that is defined on the interval 0 to 1. Okay, and a beta distribution takes two parameters. These parameters are usually by convention called alpha and beta. A beta distribution with parameters alpha and beta has as its mean alpha over alpha plus beta, and has as its variance this quantity over here. So, I mean, I can tell you more about the beta distribution, but just to make sure that your intuition is correct, let me talk about something more familiar maybe, which is a Gaussian distribution. So Gaussian is something that I hope you have encountered before. So you know that when you have to specify a Gaussian, you usually specify its mean mu and its variance sigma squared, right? So we know that a Gaussian with mean 0 and variance 2 will probably look like this picture over here. As the variance becomes larger, right? I mean, the mean still stays the same, but it has a larger spread. If you change the mean itself, right, to mu equal to 5, it's going to look like this peaked distribution over here, etc. So just like you need mu and sigma squared to define your Gaussian, you need alpha and beta to define your beta distribution. Okay. See, unlike Gaussian, which can take values between minus infinity and infinity, the beta distribution only takes values in 0 to 1. Okay. The actual probability distribution function, right, that generates these values is fixed by the parameters alpha and beta. So, in fact, if you have a beta distribution with parameters alpha equal to 1 and beta equal to 1, that's actually just the uniform distribution on 0 to 1. Okay, so the PDF function is uniformly 1 everywhere. If you have alpha equal to 3 and beta equal to 4, then it looks like this green distribution. If alpha becomes 5 and beta becomes 15, right, it looks a little bit like this blue distribution, which is peaked and which is actually going outside the plot over here. Okay, but you can imagine, right, that for different values of alpha and beta, you're going to get different beta distributions. Okay, all right. So you can, by the way, look up beta distribution even just on Wikipedia, right? You have a very extensive discussion of what is the distribution, what properties does it have, etc. Okay, now Thompson sampling. Turns out Thompson sampling is a very old algorithm. It was first written up in 1933. Okay, that's 80-90 years back. And what is the algorithm? Again, it's a very easy algorithm to describe. So we'll use slightly different notation for describing Thompson sampling. So earlier, what we needed to remember about each arm, right, was its empirical mean and number of pulls, p hat and u. But in Thompson sampling, the convention is to say, let us remember the number of successes of each arm. We're going to define that STA. That's the number of 1 rewards of arm A at time t, and the number of failures, right? Or FTA, which is the number of zeros or failures up to that point. Okay. So STA plus FTA is actually the total number of pulls of that arm so far, right? Which is called U. And S divided by S plus F or S divided by U is P hat. Okay, so you can think of S and F as a sort of equivalent way of representing U and P hat. Okay, so what we're going to do is this. Okay, at any point of time in our mind, we are going to have a belief over the true mean of each arm. Okay, so we don't know the true means, right? But based on what we have seen so far, we can have a probability distribution in our mind, right, which has the semantics of being a belief, saying this is what I believe the true mean to be. Okay, so it turns out that the correct way of doing this is to have a belief for arm A with a beta distribution whose parameters are success is +1 and failure +1. Okay, for arm A, it got STA successes and FTA failures. So let's have a beta distribution with parameters STA +1 and FTA +1. Okay, what we are going to use this beta distribution is a belief over the true mean of arm A. So a beta distribution with these particular parameters is going to have as its mean something that looks like S over S plus F. There's a sort of +1 +2 going on, which you can ignore. And the variance is S times F divided by S plus F the whole squared times S plus F, right? So the mean more or less looks like P hat, okay? It's off by a little bit, but that's fine. And the variance you will see, right, as you pull the arm more and more times. There's only 2 terms here in the numerator, but there are 3 in the denominator, okay? So the variance is going to come down as you pull the arm more times. So for intuition, right, an arm with, let's say, 3 successes out of 10 pulls. Compare that with an arm with 30 successes out of 100 pulls, right? They will have more or less the same mean. The second one will have a smaller variance, okay? So here on this picture, I have shown you how maybe, right, these beta distributions will look. So here is an arm that's been pulled a fair number of times, right? And it looks like we're reasonably confident that the mean of that arm will be somewhere over here, okay? Whereas, let's say this is an arm that has not been pulled too many times. Our best bet about the mean is somewhere over here, but there is a much bigger spread, right? That spread variance is there because the arm has not been pulled a large number of times. Similarly, you can see beta distributions for other arms, okay? So by the way, these are not genuine beta distributions. I sort of drew them by hand, okay? So this is just like a pictorial representation for getting the concept right. Beta distributions might actually look slightly different from this. Okay, so one other point to mention is at the very beginning, right, when none of the arms has been pulled, you have 0 successes and 0 failures for each arm, right? And therefore, in that case, the beta distribution you will be associating with such an arm will just be a uniform distribution. Okay, it's going to have like a constant PDF between 0 and 1. Okay, so here's what we have said thus far. Based on what we have seen, right, the number of successes and failures of each arm, we have this belief distribution. But what are we going to do with this belief distribution, right? An algorithm's job is to say which arm it wants to pull, right? So how are we going to look at this picture and say this is the arm we want to pull? So this is where Thompson sampling does something very elegant, okay? So the first step in Thompson sampling is this, okay? For every arm A, you draw a sample from this beta distribution, okay? So what does it mean to sample from a beta distribution? So the beta distribution gives you a PDF, right? So get a sample that is consistent with this PDF, right? So for example, you already know what it is to sample, let's say from a uniform distribution. When you use like a function like random in Python, right? That gives you a number drawn uniformly between 0 and 1. You can also use a library that says sample from a beta distribution with parameters alpha and beta. So that will give you a number between 0 and 1, but the probability with which it lies in any range, right, will be consistent with the beta PDF that you're using. So what we're doing for each arm is to first generate a sample X, okay, XTA for that arm. So maybe you will get samples that look like these red dots. Okay, so here for this arm, here for this arm, here for this arm. And remember, these are random samples. Okay, you draw samples from the same distributions another time, you might get different samples. Okay, not the same samples. So you draw these samples. Now, the crucial thing is which arm do we want to go and pull, right? The arm that we will go and pull, okay, in the real world is the arm that has given us the highest sample. So in this case, the red dot that was highest, right, came from the third arm. So the arm that we will go and pull, right, in the real world is arm 3. Okay. So just to be very clear, this step of drawing these beta samples is something that is happening in the agent's mind. Okay. Drawing a sample from this beta is not the same thing as going and pulling an arm. Okay. But depending on the X samples that we got, right, we make up our mind about which arm we actually want to go and pull. That is the arm that has the highest value of X. Okay, the one which gave us the highest red dot, we'll go and pull that arm. So when we pull that arm, we're going to get either a success or a failure, and therefore either S or F for that particular arm will get incremented by 1. For the other arms, actually nothing changes. Okay, S and F for the other arms stays exactly the same, and the beta distributions for those arms stays exactly the same. So the belief about the arm that we are pulling will change by a little bit, but the belief about the other arms stays exactly the same because we don't have any additional data from these arms. Okay, so it's quite remarkable that Thompson sampling 2, right, is an algorithm that achieves optimal regret. I told you that the algorithm was proposed in 1933, right? So it was found to be very effective in practice. People sort of used it. It was a well-known sort of good algorithm for sampling bandits, but it was not until less than 10 years back, right, that there was a formal proof given that the regret achieved by Thompson sampling is actually like optimal. It's logarithmic in the horizon. The accompanying constant is also competent in the sense it is something that matches Lyon-Robins's lower bound. Okay, so Thompson sampling and KLUCB are both algorithms who have an upper bound that if you take the limit of t, it will actually match Lyon-Robins's lower bound. Okay, in practice, you'll actually find Thompson sampling to be doing slightly better than KLUCB. Right, so you're welcome to implement these algorithms and check them out on a few bandit instances. So Thompson sampling, if you look at it, is a genuine randomized algorithm, okay, because we're drawing these X samples using a random number generator, okay. If you look at UCB and KLUCB, they can actually be implemented as deterministic algorithms, right, as mappings from history to a fixed arm. So only randomization that is used in those algorithms, if at all, is for tie breaking. If you have two arms with the same UCB, right, you might do tie breaking at random. You don't need to. Even if you do deterministic tie breaking, those algorithms will satisfy the regret guarantee. Thompson sampling, on the other hand, it's sort of by design, by construction, randomized algorithm. Okay, and although these look qualitatively quite different, both of them have the property that they will give us optimal regret in the limit. Okay, so I know that after telling you all this, I'm leaving you without more justification, right? More analysis, more intuition about these algorithms. So that's going to come to you next week. Okay, we don't have enough time for actually getting into the analysis of these algorithms this week. So let me conclude this week's lecture with a summary of what we have done. We've actually started making forays into the world of bandits. Okay, so we began this week by talking about regret and sublinear regret, okay, and began by showing that if an algorithm must achieve sublinear regret, it needs to be greedy in the limit and it needs to do an infinite amount of exploration, and this is vice versa. Okay, this is like necessary and sufficient conditions for getting sublinear regret. Thereafter, we looked at a lower bound, right? If we said if we want an algorithm that is good universally, right, one way of defining that is to say that it achieves sub-polynomial regret on every bandit instance. Then a formal result shows that it must incur super logarithmic regret on every bandit instance. This is the celebrated lower bound of Lyon-Robbins. Next, we looked at a few algorithms that actually give us logarithmic regret. We started out with UCB, which was conceptually quite easy. It just defines this single quantity called UCB for every arm and is greedy with respect to UCB. KLUCB does a little bit better by using a slightly different formula for the upper bound that is based on a different concentration inequality, something that we will see next week. And KLUCB actually achieves asymptotically the lower bound of Lyon-Robbins. Okay, and that same lower bound is also matched by Thompson sampling, which is a very different approach. It has a belief over each arm's true mean. It samples from that belief and then decides which arm to pull based on that. One unifying principle of UCB, KLUCB, and Thompson sampling is what is called optimism in the face of uncertainty. Okay, all of these algorithms are dealing with uncertainty. They don't know what the true means are, right? So they have to use empirical data as some kind of proxy to get some sense of what the true means might be, right? But you'll notice all these three algorithms, when they are uncertain, are optimistic in a different respect. So UCB and KLUCB, right? They're drawing confidence bounds for each arms, and they are pulling that arm which has the highest upper confidence bound, right? Not the arm which has the lowest upper confidence bound or something else. In some sense, they are hoping that the true mean of the arm will actually lie at the very tip of the UCB, right? And if that was reality, then the right thing to do would be to pull the arm with the highest UCB, right? So that's what they're doing. And similarly, Thompson sampling is drawing these X samples from its beta distributions, from its beliefs, but then it is going with that arm that gave the highest X sample, right? It did not go with the one that gave the lowest or any other X sample. So again, it's being optimistic. It's really hoping that this is an arm which has a true mean that is as good as the X that we got from our belief. Okay, so optimism in the face of uncertainty seems to be a nice paradigm. It seems to be working in situations where we need to do regret minimization. Okay, so you'll also find this same principle applied in very different, more complex settings where there is uncertainty. We are trying to minimize regret. So what's coming up next week is the sort of analytical framework to trying to get to the bottom of showing that UCB actually has logarithmic regret. In the case of Thompson sampling, we will not really give the full analysis, but I'll give you some more intuition of interpreting Thompson sampling as an algorithm that does Bayesian inference. Okay, so that's like a standard paradigm in machine learning, and Thompson sampling can also be viewed as an algorithm that does Bayesian inference. And we'll actually begin next week's lecture by looking at a couple of concentration inequalities. These are the mathematical results that allow us to bridge the gap, right, between what we have seen, right, and reality. So there is in reality a true mean, but all we have seen is a manifestation, right, through the samples, and that gives us an empirical mean. So how much can we trust the empirical mean, right? That is mathematically characterized by concentration inequalities, and that's what we get started with in week 3. Okay, all right, we've covered a fair amount of ground this week. Please follow up by looking at the course page, looking at the references, as well as the weekly quiz that gets published at the end of each week. Okay, thanks, see you, and see you next week. Okay, bye.